Are you prepared to stand trial and profess your guilt or innocence before the Seven?
We need to trust each other. We have so many enemies now.
The Freys and the Lannisters send their regards.
What do you want?
I thought you knew what I wanted.
Tell him what you did to her. Tell him!
Are you afraid? Good. You're in the great game now. And the great game is terrifying.
Hi everyone, it's Mike, and in this video I will be breaking down the Season 6 finale trailer for Game of Thrones. There's quite a bit of content to get to, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the trailer begins at the Sept of Baelor in King's Landing. Now this is where they're conducting the trials of the faith for both Cersei Lannister as well as Sir Loras Tyrell. We then hear a soundbite from the High Sparrow, basically asking for a confession. And then it's followed by an almost Christ-like scene where he's motioning Loras's chin up as if to say, confess to me, sin no more, and all things will be forgiven. So obviously the trials are going to be the most focused on and time-consuming portion of the finale. There are several unanswered questions that remain out there, such as, will Loras confess? We just touched on that. Or does Margaery have some alternative scheme that she's been working on? All signs point to yes. She's done a tremendous job fooling the High Sparrow into thinking that she is this completely redeemed and pious queen now who recognized the error in her ways. And then there's also the even larger question. Will Cersei turn into the Mad Queen and nuke King's Landing, or at least the Sept of Baelor? And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, basically referring back to episode 8, whenever Qyburn comes in and says, the rumors have been confirmed, and they are much grander than we initially anticipated. Ultimately, what this is referring to, or at least the prevailing theory is, and it's fairly obvious to most people, is that they have located the caches of wildfire stored beneath the city by the Mad King Aerys. And obviously, his intent was to nuke the city himself, but Jaime Lannister shows up and, pretty much puts an end to that by killing the pyromancers and ultimately stabbing the Mad King in the back, earning his title Kingslayer. Before we move on to the next big unanswered question, we need to take a look back at Season 5, Episode 1. Now, the scene I'm about to refer to occurs in the book A Feast for Crows as well. Basically, Cersei is having a flashback to her youth, where she and her friend Melara Heatherspoon are walking through the woods trying to find this person called Maggie the Frog. Now, Maggie the Frog is essentially a witch who is said to have had prophetic powers. So the girls basically just want to go there and have their futures told. So eventually Cersei finds the hut, goes inside, and after some aggressive negotiation with Maggie the Frog, in which she basically threatens to have her head removed if she doesn't get what she wants, Maggie agrees to let Cersei ask her 3 questions, but also caveats it by saying, you're not going to like what you're going to hear. So the first question that Cersei asks is, when will I wed the prince? And Maggie responds with, never. You will wed the king. So at the time, Cersei was betrothed to Daenerys' brother, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. And obviously Maggie is alluding to the fact that she's not going to marry him. She's going to marry King Robert Baratheon. Little vague, but yes, Maggie nailed this one. The next one that Cersei asked is basically just an affirmation on whether or not she'll be queen. And Maggie responds with, I. Queen you shall be, until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all that you hold dear. So this is apparently referring to Margaery Tyrell, who is now Queen Margaery Baratheon, and all that Cersei held dear at the time would have been Tommen. So Cersei's final question will actually serve as a segue into the next big question that is left unanswered pertaining to the trial at the Sept, and that is whether or not she was going to have children with the king. And Maggie responds with, yes, the king will have 16, essentially referring to all of Robert's bastards. And then for Cersei, she will have 3, and predicts that gold will be their crowns and gold their shrouds. So obviously she knows that they are going to be Lannisters. Goes on to say, And when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar, and please excuse my high Valyrian, it's probably as bad as Tyrion's, shall wrap his hands around your pale white throat and choke the life from you. Now, some of you might be wondering, what the hell does Valonqar even mean? Well, Valonqar is actually High Valyrian for little brother, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in the video. Right now, I want to talk about the other part of the prophecy that talks about Cersei crying, and generally that's assumed to be her outliving all of her children, so all of her children will be dead. So right now, Tommen is the last one, and my prediction for this episode is that yes, Cersei will blow up the Sept and unintentionally include Tommen as collateral damage. So we've spent a fair amount of time discussing the events in King's Landing, and before we move on, I want to talk about the Valonqar prophecy. Uh, Tyrion is generally accepted as the Valonqar in this situation. He hates Cersei, Cersei hates him, he's the definitive younger brother, but keep in mind that it's mentioned a couple of times in the books, and I believe once or twice in the show, that Jaime is also a younger brother. And mind you, if Cersei does fulfill her role as the Mad Queen and blows up a portion of the Sept and takes Tommen down as well, Jaime was the guy who thwarted that attempt by the Mad King initially. So I would have zero doubts that he would have no issues choking the life out of Cersei. In this next scene, we have what appears to be a White Raven en route to Winterfell. Now, White Ravens have not made an appearance on the show yet, but these are specifically used by the Maesters of the Citadel to notify the Seven Kingdoms whenever a season is changed. In the books, a White Raven actually does arrive in Winterfell. However, it's to notify the Maester that the season has changed to fall, not winter. So this could be as simple as the Maester sending out, the obvious word to Winterfell that, hey, it is winter now. Or it could be something, a little bit more peculiar. Perhaps Sam has arrived at the Citadel and is sending word to Jon Snow that, hey, glad you're alive, glad you kicked Ramsay's ass, something of that nature. But that's really improbable. So this is probably just, Maester of the Citadel sending word to Winterfell that, hey, we are Captain Obvious. It is winter in Winterfell now. So we arrive in Winterfell and see Jon talking to Sansa, and Jon mentions that their trust in one another is now more important than ever. This seems like a clear indication that Jon is confronting Sansa about keeping her alliance with Lord Baelish a secret, which really bothered quite a few people, myself included. I'm not sure if this is a deep-seated trust issue caused by her tumultuous time spent with Ramsay, or if that same experience just forged her into a darker form of herself. I am, however, 100% convinced that there was a better-than-average shot to save Rickon's life, even though no one really stands a chance against a sniper that can shoot a moving target down at 400-plus meters with a bow. I mean, to put it into perspective, in the military, shooting a target down at 400 meters with an open-sight M4 carbine is still considered a tough task. And that's not to say that I didn't tremendously enjoy this episode, I truly did. It's just that there's been a lot of inconsistencies in the directing over the course of this past season. The fact that Gilly's baby doesn't age, Littlefinger teleporting from one side of the continent to the next, that's always been the case, actually. And then there was the tragedy that was the Waif Arya sequence in which Arya manages to survive a grievous stab wound to the gut, jumping in a canal, avoiding sepsis, and still managing to take down a trained assassin. But large in part, the directors do a great job. It's just that these seem to be becoming a little bit more prevalent and thus a lot more annoying. So quite a few people think Ramsay saying, "I'm a part of you now," in last episode was a nod at Lady Stark being pregnant with Ramsay's child. While this is entirely possible, I think it's a different seed that Ramsay planted. If you look back at Septon Ray's talk to Sandor Clegane about violence earlier this season, in which he says, "Violence is a disease. You don't cure a disease by spreading it to more people," I believe this to be the case here with Sansa. Ramsay has planted the seed of evil within her, and this is evidenced in the manner in which she disposes of him. Some say poetic justice. I'm not so sure about that. Smirking after you've fed someone alive to their own dogs is not the act of a sane person. Justice is one thing. This was just sadistic. We'll have to see how Sansa's arc unfolds, but it would appear that she's changed into a darker version of herself, and definitely for the worse. So in the next scene of the trailer, we see something that's very reminiscent of the season 3 oh shit moment, and yes, I'm referring to the Reigns of Castamere, also known as the Red Wedding. Walder Frey shows his delusions and arrogance by stating, "The Freys and the Lannisters send their regards." I mean, seriously, the Freys basically lost a very important stronghold in Riverrun, and were in the process of getting completely owned, albeit by a very well-respected military commander in Blackfish, but it was Jaime and his keen manipulation of Edmure. Remember him threatening to catapult his baby into Riverrun, that essentially saved the day. And Jaime, during this scene, it looks like he could not have a more unimpressed look on his face. So I'm really hoping there's something to that. I'm also hoping we get to see some Stark revenge here. Not necessarily Lady Stoneheart from the books, and for the non-book readers, Lady Stoneheart is basically the reanimated corpse of Catelyn Stark. Kind of like Jon Snow, they had a Red Priest, Thoros of Myr, resurrect her, but she came back much less Catelyn Stark than Jon Snow is Jon Snow, because she was dead for a little bit longer. But she's basically running around with the Brotherhood without banners and killing anybody associated with the Red Wedding and with the Freys in general. So I don't expect to see her in the show. What I would like to see is Arya arrive, jump into Littlefinger's teleportation device and arrive at the twins and exact some Stark revenge. Just given the recent directing inaccuracies and improbabilities, I wouldn't be surprised to see this, but I don't think that's going to happen. What I would like to see is Jaime jump back on his redemption arc in some form or fashion. And for the non-book readers, in A Feast for Crows, Jaime essentially realizes how terrible Cersei is, and he is generally not attracted to her for that reason. He's pretty much broken it all off with her, has no affection for her. And she's also gained a ton of weight too, so I don't think that helps much either. So I would like to see show Jaime catch up with book Jaime in that respect by cutting down the phrase. As for reasons why he, mentioned that he really respected Catelyn Stark in that episode, and he also swore an oath to keep Sansa and Arya safe. So I think that might have something to do with it, considering the fact that with the phrase alive, it always poses a threat to those two. And it would appear that he has zero intention of breaking that oath. In the book A Storm of Swords, he's talking to Brienne and says, "I have made kings and unmade them. Sansa Stark is my last chance for honor." So that leads me to believe that he truly intends on trying to keep them safe at least. Circling back to Winterfell, we have a scene with creepy Uncle Peter and Sansa, and they're alone, and Sansa asks him, "What do you want?" And Peter replies with, "I thought you knew." Now, one might initially think that he wants Sansa for himself, very beautiful young girl, and then he has control over Winterfell, but he seems to operate more as a puppet master to me. So I would think that perhaps he might have something in mind along the lines of marrying Sweet Robin to Sansa, and he is just pulling both of those strings. And if you recall, he had a conversation with Roose Bolton in a previous season about the last time the North and the Knights of the Vale combined forces. They took down the largest dynasty the world has ever seen, and he's obviously referring to the Targaryens in that sense. But all of this might even be a kind of a moot point once the White Walkers arrive at the Wall. Bear in mind, he's still going to have his ambitions, but really, that's going to be a game changer whenever they show up. So I expect that to be a lot like the Walking Dead series, where you have the zombie element that is a threat, but you also have the sinister human element that you've always got to worry about. It's going to be very interesting, and a very, very interesting plot line should develop from that. We're staying in Winterfell for the next scene, and it's one in which Davos is clearly pissed off at Melisandre. If you think back to the last episode, Davos was walking around and happened to stumble upon the sacrificial site where they burned the Princess Shireen as an offering to the Red God or R'hllor or the Lord of Light, whatever you want to call him. And he also finds the stag that he carved for her right before he took off. So I'm really interested to see exactly what Jon does here. The way I see it, he has three options. The first being he can just let her go and say, "Hey, we don't want you around here anymore." Second, he could say, "Davos, piss off. She's staying here. She resurrected me, and she's going to help us fight the great battle." And the third one is the one that has the most interesting implications, just because of a tinfoil theory that I read. And that's executing her, obviously, with his sword, and somehow managing to transfer Melisandre's inner fire into Longclaw, thus turning it into Lightbringer. And for those of you who don't know, Lightbringer is the sword that Azor Ahai wielded during the Long Night, in which he drove back the Great Other and saved the War for the Dawn. And as it relates here, Azor Ahai had all kinds of issues tempering his sword when he forged it the first time. The second time, he tried to stick it through a lion, and it worked a little bit better. And then he finally stabbed his wife with it, Nisa, and then it started burning, and that's how we got that tempered blade. So this is kind of similar to the situation with Melisandre. Again, total tinfoil theory. This would be a bit of a stretch, but again, I wouldn't be surprised to see it happen. Then we have a flash of Bran. We haven't seen Bran in a few episodes, so hopefully we get a cool reveal. Definitely want to see the conclusion to the Tower of Joy. Does R plus L equal J? Or does it equal D? Or does it equal DJ? There are so many theories surrounding that one, so hopefully we get a reveal on that. And finally, we arrive in Meereen with a scene between Daenerys and Daario. And I'm sorry, young male audience, I don't think Dany is breaking up with Daario to hook up with Yara. Now, in the books, this is, totally plausible. She is definitely bisexual. She hooks up with both men and women, kind of like Yara. Yara is not a lesbian in the books, although it appears to be in the show. She likes both guys and girls, but I don't think that's happening. But there is something that's going on here, so I'm interested to see what happens with Daario. My previous theories about Daario possibly being Euron or Victarion Greyjoy, they've been debunked, so we'll see what happens. And finally, we get to the heart-to-heart between Dany and Tyrion, where Tyrion is saying, "You're in the great game now, and the great game is terrifying." And this could mean a myriad of things. I mean, she could find out about the White Walkers. Daario could have just dropped a bombshell on her. Who knows? But essentially what Tyrion is trying to say is, hey, it is going to get crazy. It's already crazy, but it's going to get even more crazy. And as for Lancel Lannister's quick flash, I think he's just going there to testify during the trials and basically condemn Cersei of not only incest, but more importantly, regicide. And that's, circling back to my initial theory, which completely ties into Daenerys's vision in the House of the Undying of the Red Keep looking like it was completely destroyed and there's snow falling in it. So that's something that's very foretelling. So that pretty much wraps things up. I know this was a very lengthy review for a trailer, but this is our first video and I wanted to deliver as much content as possible. Please click the subscribe button in the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to be doing a lot of videos, a lot of historical context and theory crafting over the course of the next 9 months until the next season. So feel free to leave comments as well if you have any suggestions or requests in terms of what type of video you would like to see. We would love to hear back from you. Anyways, take care and thanks for tuning in.